So welcome back to these classes, and there are few new participants.
That's right.
Yeah, so we will be recapitulating some of the classes which we have already done in the first 10 minutes or so. And it's a good recap for everybody else too, after a break. So we had first started with, uh, mm, of course, keeping the book Happiness Hypothesis, the Happiness Hypothesis as the base, and then we proceeded. And then later on, we switched to the Bhagavad Gita. And when we were analyzing some of the portions of the book, the Happiness Hypothesis, we came to understand that we are not that free as we think ourselves to be. There seems to be an instinctual self within us, which is like a parallel self, and that itself is governed by so many other sub-selves, and we are a mixture of all of them, whereas we give so much emphasis on our analytical self, which is a puny little self, and sometimes it is so helpless that its logic or even the capacity to analyze is clouded or governed by the instinctual self. and we also saw that the instinctual self consists of, as per that book, mainly like a parallel realities or parallel brains, the gut brain, and some kind of, we can loosely say, the endocrine system brain. Means it has its own influence in our thinking and decision making. The gut has its own influence, and the inbuilt genetic factors, they have their own influences. And so we are a mix of so many influences, and even our logic is driven by those influences, because the basic belief system is governed by those influences. And even with time, the endocrine system starts showing different secretions. So our thinking gets covered by that. And we also saw many a times the freedom which we talk about is actually, many a times, it is slavery to the senses. So promoting slavery to the senses is uh, unwittingly seen as a freedom of a human being. So on one hand, we are promoting slavery, and on the other hand, we think it is the freedom. So that was the background. With that background, we started the Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavad Gita, as we discussed, it's both a Yoga Shastra and a Moksha Shastra. So what is a Moksha Shastra? A scripture which talks about lasting freedom from sorrow. We have defined moksha as freedom from sorrow, lasting freedom from sorrow. And Yoga Shastra is the one which prepares us for that frame of mind in which we can understand things, which leads to lasting freedom from sorrow. And there were floating concepts about the Bhagavad Gita, and we discussed that this grantha, this scripture, addresses a variety of audience. It addresses those who are go-getters, who are doing people, who need to do, need to prove, need to uh, mm, be very active in this world. And even for them, this scripture is applicable because Arjuna was of that type of a person. And at the same time, it addresses those people who are inwardly drawn, who are introverted, or who are in a withdrawal mode due to whatever reasons, due to inner temperament or due to change of age or whatever. So even for them, there is enough teaching. It is a scripture both for the grahasthas and for the sannyasis, if we want to make that distinction provisionally for the time being. So it is that those misconceptions that it is only for the sannyasis, those who are in the ashrams, or those who are left out in this world, so to say, it is only for them. No, it's not true, because we saw that the teacher of the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna, was a Mahagrahastha with so many wives, and the disciple who was listening to him was also no ordinary Grahastha. He also had more than one wife, and they were very much in activity, and the activity was not an ordinary activity, it was an activity of battle, where lives were at stake. So making presumptions that it is for those who are retired people who can't do anything, so they have to come and study Bhagavad Gita. No, it's not like that. And then there are presumptions that what does the Gita say? Do your duty, which anyway already I am doing. So I need not know what is there in the Bhagavad Gita. Well, it is like just like saying, what does the newspaper say? There are some good things happening in the world and some bad things happening in the world, so I need not read the newspaper. That's a very silly argument, the silly way of thinking. The 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 taste lies in the details, and when you go into the details, then only you know. In fact, what do you know about your duty? In fact, these animals and the birds, etc., they know their duty much better than us because they are programmed and they don't deviate from that. Whereas our own, as human beings, we have a lot of confusion. What is my duty? Whatever is convenient to me, whatever is my comfort zone, what I've been doing continuously without discomfort, I define that as my duty. It's not like that. It's much more than that. So first, what is your duty? Know that. Then you should do your duty. Why? Why you have to do your duty? What will happen if you don't do your duty? All those things are discussed in the Bhagavad Gita. Then we also discussed that it is important to know the background of the Mahabharata war, and then only we can understand the first and first portion of the second chapter, first chapter, and a smaller initial portion of the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Because Arjuna's argument is, why should we fight? Why should we kill just for the sake of kingdom? I don't want such a kingdom. So his arguments are very compelling. In fact, one would think that why there shouldn't be any war. Arjuna was so wise. At least at the last moment, he understood. He realized his mistake, and the war should have been called off. Well, there's a larger issue here, and the larger issue is addressed in the Bhagavad Gita. We all face this problem all the time. I normally tell people in my talks that as parents, as elders, many a times we are Dhritarashtra and Gandhari. Dhritarashtra was helplessly blind. He represents the helpless blindness, and Gandhari represents acquired blindness. Many a times it becomes so easy for us to point out what problem exists in the other family, why the problem exists. We know it very clearly. But when the same set of problems come within my own family, and then I forget all my logic, all my wisdom, everything is gone. We are so clouded to protect, to give a cover up to our own kin and kith. We don't take actions. So that is what is brought out in the Mahabharata as a whole, and Bhagavad Gita is a portion of the Mahabharata epic, in which there is a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna addressing a few things. So the war was fought not for personal pleasures, not for personal benefit of kingdom, but it was fought to punish the perpetrators of the crime, and the criminals were the kings themselves. And how they were the criminals, we have discussed that. The last biggest episode which happened was in the court of Dhritarashtra, when Draupadi was disrobed or tried to be disrobed. So if a princess can be disrobed in the court, right in the front of the king, who is going to punish that king and all those who are complicit in that action? So the only way to punish them was war, and to fight that war. In fact, to avoid that war, Krishna went as a peacemaker, gave peace proposals, but they were adamant. And so then there was no choice but to fight the war. And of course, it brought a lot of destruction. But for establishing the dharma, for a larger good of the entire globe, sometimes a small level of destruction is very important. This is what is conveyed in the Bhagavad Gita. So with all this background, we move to the second chapter. And in the second chapter, Arjuna was confused whether I should fight or not. In fact, he had made up his mind not to fight. And then he confabulated the reasoning why fighting shouldn't be done. And this is a common phenomena which we all face all the times, that we make conclusions first. We already pre-decide a few things and then supply arguments for it. And then Krishna as the teacher, had to address that problem. And since Arjuna surrendered and he wanted Shreyas instead of Preyas. Shreyas means something which is good for me. Preyas means something which I like. And there may be things which I like and good for me, then there are no conflicts. But many a times, things which I like are not good for me. So that conflict had come up, and he sought help of Krishna. He surrendered, and then Krishna could teach. It's so important that unless a person surrenders, no other person can actually intervene and make changes in that person's thinking. When we talk of making people understand, making people see things, we sometimes think that the teacher or the one who is a guide, he is doing the miracle. But really speaking, more than half the contribution lies with the person who wants to see. A person who refuses to see can never be shown. Because the same Krishna, same powerful Krishna, with same wisdom, he couldn't make Duryodhana see things, although he tried a lot. But why he could make Arjuna see the things? Because Arjuna surrendered. So surrendering one's previous set of notions, ideas, belief systems, and being open to a new set of belief system or new set of ideas, surrender is the only way. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So with this, we move on to the next set of shlokas. Can you please, Rajesh ji?
Which number actually? What number?
I will tell you. Just a second. Okay, this also let me cover and then we will go. In the meantime, you can open the 47, 48, 49, they are together.
I'll do that.
You start opening and I'll cover the previous set of shlokas.
Okay.
And then we saw in the second chapter, this is a very, again, important thing. Our actions are governed by artha and kama. Artha is the seeking security, and desire. Kama is seeking fulfillment of pleasures, desires. And most of our activities and life is oriented towards this. In fact, I put it in a very crude and blunt form. The majority of pursuit of our life is to create a lot of manure and trash. Manure means you eat heaps, mountains of grain or food or whatever. And of course, since you eat, then you throw out the waste, which will be equal to mountain. So that is the one contribution we make. Second is, we produce so much of trash in our life, buy things, and then it becomes trash. So that is what we call as a happy life. The more mountain we create of manure, a variety of manure, and the more variety of trash and volume of trash we create, that is considered as successful living. Isn't it true? So that is one way of living or one way of seeing things, where I am controlled by my senses and I am helpless and I keep pursuing things to fulfill the requirement of my senses. I am helpless, and that helplessness is seen as power. I keep doing things. So I am under a self-illusion. So that is one way of doing things. Here Krishna suggests that there is another way of doing things. In the north, we have a word in Hindi, mangta. Mangta, you understand? The one wo jo mangta hai, wo mangta, a beggar. But I didn't use the word beggar because it doesn't convey. One who begs also is a beggar, fine that way. So I'm always a beggar, begging for this thing or that thing in life and continuing my life. So a beggarly life I can continue. That is one way of living. Another way of living is I do actions not as a beggar, but as an independent, free person. What does it mean? I don't expect results for myself. I do expect results, but I don't expect results for myself, and still I do the thing because it is the right thing to do. That's a very different way of living. And Krishna says, the one even partially invests himself or herself in such set of actions, that person's life changes. From a beggarly person, from a incapacitated person, from a small person, it changes to a free person. And unless that free person that is invoked by faking it and making it, one can continue throughout one's life as a beggar, sometimes pleasures, sometimes pain, and the life continues. But if one wants to be immune towards these ups and downs of life, the pleasure and pain spikes, then to get that immunity, at least a portion of one's karma has to be such where one is not seeking artha and kama, security and pleasures for oneself, but is doing the action just for the sake of dharma, because those are right actions to be done. And doing actions in such a way starts giving a frame of mind in that person where that knowledge takes place, which leads to lasting freedom from sorrow. We never defined moksha as gain of happiness, but we use double negative, freedom from sorrow. Why? There is a reason. Gaining happiness has its own connotation. Happiness means smile, laughter, etc. But those smile, laughter, etc. also starts becoming painful after some time. Whereas freedom from sorrow can be compared to something like a state of deep sleep, or a person feeling relaxed after a very deep sleep, which is not really happiness, but it's a state of being oneself. It's a state of being comfortable with oneself. Can you show it now, please?
Yeah, sure.
So now we are moving on to the most abused shloka of the Bhagavad Gita.
You're not seeing now, right?
No, I'm not seeing it now.
Okay, let me stop and I'll start again.
Okay. So many of you must be aware of this shloka. Karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala hetur bhuhu ma te sangostva karmani. What does it say? Only doing actions, performing one's karma is within one's circle of influence, not the result. You cannot control the result. At most, you can control your actions. So, don't assume the responsibility, unnecessary responsibility of controlling your results, controller of your results. You can plan in such a way that the results should come in a certain way. That is all fine. But the result may come the way you want it or may not come the way you want it. That possibility is always there. So acknowledge that accept that possibility, and then keep doing what is to be done. So this frees oneself from the burden of that anxiety which arises after performing the action. Whether it will be the way I want it, or whether it will be something different. Instead of putting oneself in that anxiety mode, one has a choice. One can plan the next set of actions. In case the results are not the way I want it, okay, then I have a plan B, I have a plan C, plan D, whatever. That is fine. But worrying about the result and then becoming paralyzed is not a good way of living. So this shloka directly addresses those people who are steeped in actions and who love doing actions and who are go-getters, and which is fine. There is no problem. And it also gives an immunity to people to accept failure. Accepting success is one need not teach. It comes naturally to us. But even in the best scenario cases, only 50% of our actions can bring success over a long period of time. And in most of the cases, it may not be true even that much. Maybe 10, 20 or 30% of our actions only lead to success. The remaining 70 are failures. So it teaches us to accept the possibility of failure, be prepared for it, and not get paralyzed by the failure. So it's such a wonderful shloka in that sense. Then the next shloka is Yogastha Kuru Karmani Sangam Tyaktva Dhananjaya Siddhya Siddhyo Samo Bhutva Samatvam Yoga Uchyate. This gives a total solution. Yogastha Kuru Karmani. You perform action established in yoga. What does it mean, established in yoga? Established in yoga is, already we had discussed in the last to last class possibly. I perform actions as a worship to the Lord. Swakarmana tamabhyarchya siddhim vindati manava. I perform my actions not for myself, but as a worship to the Almighty. With that attitude, when I do, then actually I am performing the actions for somebody else. And I am like an employee, a bhritya, like a servant or whatever, just carrying out my activities, my actions for my Lord. And when I do it with that attitude, that I am performing the actions for my Lord, as a servant of my Lord, then the burden of facing the result, it gets reduced. Whatever is the result, okay, it is the Lord's result, not mine. In the sense, like if I am a very sincere employee of a company and I take a decision, and if there is a failure, of course, personally it affects me. Suppose there is a failure is such that there is a lot of loss of money. So there is some sense of setback. But finally, I know it is not just my money which has gone. In fact, I didn't lose any money. It's the company's money.
Morning, how are you?
So,
it's good to hear your
hello.
voice. I'm very good. How
Kindly
about you?
put off your
Having a
mic,
good
please.
weekend?
It's disturbing everybody else.
Thank God for that. Thank God for that. So,
can you please mute it? Yeah.
I'll do that.
So when the action is performed for the Almighty, the pressure to accept the result, when it goes off track, it becomes much lesser. So siddhi asiddhyoho samo bhutva. Siddhi means success, asiddhi means failure. Being same or having the equanimity to face both success and the failure with the in the same stride is called, and performing the actions as an offering to the Lord is called being in yoga, yogastha. And so that's how it defines samatvam yoga uchyate. Being in an equanimous state is called yoga. And how does one gain that attitude of equanimity? By the attitude of surrender to the Almighty. Performing actions, performing what is to be done, and offering that to the Lord is called performing actions, being in yoga. This immunes me from the ups and downs which I face due to success and failure of the results of the actions. Then the next shloka is Durena Hyavaram Karma Buddhi Yoga Dhananjaya Buddhau Sharanam Anvichya Kripanaha Phalahetavaha. Before I go into the next shloka, I must remind why we are doing these shlokas. Remember, we are talking about lasting freedom from sorrow. We are talking about not being a beggar all the time, which is our default state. Not being helplessly doing things, helplessly pursuing things in life as though it is my free will, but actually it is governed by something else. So trying to come out of that frame, trying to really be free, and not being a beggar of artha and kama, and still performing one's actions, which are right, which are appropriate. We are talking about that. And to do that, then for such a person, the very definition of success and failure changes. And that's how it doesn't affect. Really speaking, success and failure, the word itself is defined by us. We first define that when this result comes, then only it is called success. If something else comes, then it is failure. First we define it, then we get into that trap. It is like playing, cricket, or I know cricket, more about cricket, so I can say. So I define that when the ball hits the boundary, then you are successful, but when it hits the wickets, it's failure. Who defined it? I defined it. With that definition, I play the game, and then I am elated when I am successful, and I am depressed when I am unsuccessful. So it is all which I have defined. I means a set of people. So we all make that definition, and then we become happy or unhappy. Otherwise, there are only events in life. Okay, and some may be convenient for the body, some may not be convenient for the body. But it is not just the event, and it's not just the body pain which brings problem. It's the notional pain which brings more problem than the actual body pain. For example, almost all the emotional hurts. In fact, emotional hurt is one of the major problems of life, isn't it? A physical hurt, you can go to the police or you can do something and one can get rid of it. But emotional hurts, what to do? Nothing you can do. And emotional hurt is totally dependent on the person who is getting hurt. Totally. It is just like I get hurt when somebody abuses me. Correct? But suppose the other person abuses me in a language which I don't know. I know Indian languages, the other person abuses me in Chinese or Tibetan language. Will I get hurt? Even though the same abuse was hurled at me, which should have given me pain. It didn't give me pain. Why? Because I didn't buy it. Due to whatever reason. Because I didn't understand it. That's why I didn't buy it. And since I didn't buy it, it didn't hurt me. So emotional pain is person's own creation. Physical pain may be external creation. But the after effect of the physical pain, which leads to emotional pain, the person contributes himself or herself. And in fact, that is the major pain. That's my standard example, which I give. If somebody pricks needle on my skin, I get physical pain, correct? And if somebody unnecessarily does it, that physical pain converts into an emotional pain. I get irritated, I get angry. How could you abuse my body? Why would you prick pin on my body? What do you think of me? Etc. etc. But when the same pin is pricked by a doctor who wants to inject something, the pain is same. Which pain? The physical pain. But I have no emotional pain. In fact, I am grateful to the doctor that he, at the right moment, he could prick the pin, the needle. Correct? So this one example itself is a strong example enough to tell us that there is a difference between physical pain and emotional pain. Emotional pain comes from our own conclusion towards the physical pain. And sometimes there may not be even a iota of physical pain, it's all emotional pain. Like abusive language of somebody else, or a other person ignoring me. Correct? Yes, a person making me irrelevant. That gives me pain. This is a very common phenomena in all the voluntary organizations. What gives us pain? Somebody tells us that you resign, you are not needed anymore. Come on, I should be relieved, isn't it? I have been doing so much work voluntarily without gaining any salary or anything. Now you are relieving me, so I must feel happy about it. But tell me, how many people feel happy? It gives emotional pain, isn't it? When nothing was done. Why? Because the person feels left out, ignored. That gives emotional pain. And whose creation is that emotional pain? That person's own creation. Own certain assumptions, certain belief systems, certain expectations. They created that pain. So how to make oneself immune towards that? Gradually get into this immunity mode. What? Performing actions with the attitude of yoga, samatvam, equanimity. That gradually leads us towards a state where emotional pains are not created. Then in the next sloka. So I'm connecting. It's not like the Bhagavad Gita, Lord said something. Lord said something. If it is not relevant to me and not useful to me, I shouldn't be talking, and we should not be wasting our times. Unless every sloka or whatever we read is relevant to my life, why should I be reading? I would rather read a novel, a fiction. Then, Durena hi avaram karma, buddhi yoga dhananjaya, buddhav sharanam anvichya, kripanaha phala hetava. So what does Lord say in a simple language? All other types of actions, other than what? Other than those performed with the attitude of offering. Okay? And not expecting results for oneself. Remember, the phrase should be complete. No, it's not, I didn't stop at not expecting results. No, not expecting results for oneself, where you are not the beneficiary. Results you do expect, but you are not the beneficiary. So such actions are much superior to those actions where I am the beneficiary. Why? Performing actions where I am the beneficiary, I have been doing it. Anyway, I will be doing it all through my life. And I don't find the courage. I can't gather enough courage to do certain things, the right things, where I am not the beneficiary. And Krishna, Lord Krishna is prodding, nudging Arjuna that start doing that. At least some of your actions should be like that. And this is what we even discussed in some of our classes. Okay, if not all my actions, if I am performing 100 actions, 10 at least, if not 10, at least one action I will perform every day where I am not the beneficiary and it's the right action. So that frees me from being a beggar gradually. Okay. So this is the shloka. Then after this also, did I send?
Yeah.
One more I must have sent.
Yeah, I have it actually. You want to see?
Yeah. Okay. Then the concept of Sthita Prajna comes. We won't go into it. We will just touch the topic and then leave the session open for question and answers. So Lord has been talking about equanimity, a frame of mind where the mind is equanimous and how to work towards it, etc. So naturally, there was a curiosity in the mind of Arjuna that what happens when we get that equanimity. So instead of asking that question, what happens when we get that equanimity? He questioned this way: how does that person behave? What are the characteristics of that person who has gained that equanimity of mind? Okay, because he wants to know. You are selling the proposal of equanimity, fine, looks interesting, but then what happens after that? Does equanimity equal to being paralytic? You don't feel anything. You are in a state of coma. You don't desire anything. You don't feel anything. You don't feel the pleasure. You don't feel the pain. So is it a comatic state? If it is such a state, then why would I go for it? Better be what I am already. Or is there something different from it? So we have our own assumptions in life. So we think unless I am agitated, I won't get enough energy to really work. So that's how in the West they have a phrase. So we are going to do this. So are you excited about it? Don't we have that phrase? I listen to it all the time. Sometimes I wonder, why should I be excited about it? I just have to do it, plan it and do it. But then the concept is, if the excitement is not there, how will you do it? No, you can do it even without excitement. It is just like saying that if you are peaceful and calm, then you will go to sleep. No, one can be in a meditative state. One can be calm, peaceful, and yet very alert. Alertness is equated with agitated mind. We can't even think that a peaceful mind can be alert, because that's how we have learned things. Similarly, we can't even think that a person who is equanimous can be alive, can be non-comatic and non-paralytic. How can you be without desires, without being affected, and yet you are doing things? How is it possible? Because that's how we are wired to think that way. So those things Krishna answers in these shlokas, which maybe we will be seeing next time. So now it's open to all. Please ask questions.
Let me stop sharing it first.
Yeah.
Anybody has a
Silence is-
question?
Yeah,
Anybody has a question?
my name is Thomas. Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, please.
So in those slides, thank you, first of all, for this amazing explanation. I'm new to the Bhagavad Gita, so I'm really excited to hear all this. My question is, I saw the word yoga in that slide, and it said evenness of mind. And I also saw equanimous as samadhi. Is there a distinction between the two, between some evenness of mind and equanimity?
No, in the current context, in this shloka, they are both the same. Evenness of mind, equanimity, it's like synonymous words.
Okay, thank you.
But let me tell you, the word yoga has a very wider meaning too. And in certain context, yoga will mean, of course, this evenness of mind part will remain, but it will be more than that. Yoga also means joining, okay, connecting.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Unity.
Yeah, and unity with the bigger being, okay. And evenness of mind is a prerequisite for that connection. So both ways, yoga serves the meaning in both the ways.
Okay.
It is a means for that connection.
Hers wants to ask the question. Hers?
Yeah.
Hello, Hari Om. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this session. Sir, I have a question on the action, like basically attaching the fruits of action to your action, basically. So even taking a step back, my question is, what determines, or how do we determine what action should be done? Okay, if I do an action, I will not keep the fruits of action in my mind, or I will not be attached. But if I have 10 actions in front of me, and possibly more 90 that I don't even know,
right,
what action should I do right now?
I need to ask you a counter question. Is your question, what are the actions I should be performing? Or is your question, which type of action should I perform wherein I don't expect the results of action, expect the result of actions for myself? Remember, I am the beneficiary. What can you clarify a little bit more, please?
I think both questions are related for me. I think the first itself, like, how do I determine what actions to do in the first place? So just making it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a minute. Let us give a pause there.
Right.
That itself is a huge topic.
Right.
And I'm really grateful to you. You have really touched the core problem, and which most of the people gloss over. What actions I should perform is a huge learning, and it's a lifetime continuous learning, because things are dynamic. It's not fixed, and my life itself is dynamic. I'm aging. Everybody ages, correct? So what should be my action now, 1 year down the line, 5 years down the line, and 10 years down the line, and even 50 years down the line. Correct? At least a broad framework should be there. Nobody thinks about it. Everybody thinks survival is my action. All my actions are governed by, remember, manure. I don't want to use the word shit. So all my actions are governed by two things. What variety of manure I can create with birthday cakes and snacks and this and that, whatever. And what variety of trashes I can create. And we think, I want to see his face, just a second. Where is he? Here. And we think that I already know what I need to do. It's not that. That is a shastra in itself. What actions I should perform. And when we come to the Bhagavad Gita, we assume that already the person knows what is one's swadharma. Swadharma means swakarma, what one should be doing. That is the assumption we make, which is such a big assumption. Because suppose I put the class, what I should be doing. I don't know, already here the number of participants are 14. There I may get 1.4. Because everybody will say what shit it is. Do you think I don't know what I should be doing? I should be living, creating more manure and more trashes and getting more hurt. Correct? So this is a separate topic in itself. Then to simplify it, okay, whatever I know about myself at the moment, that type of action I'm doing, fine. So within that, at least some actions I can choose where I deliberately push myself not to be a beneficiary. Correct? That's the easiest thing to do. Because learning what action I should be performing is a huge learning. It will take time. Now, till such time, what should I be doing? Okay, whatever I know, what action I should be doing, provisionally I accept it, and at least 10%, if not 10%, 1%, I make the actions deliberately such where I am not the beneficiary. In the meantime, side by side, I keep learning what is my swadharma, what I should be doing now, near future, and long-term future. Okay? Did I answer that?
Yeah. Thank you.
I think Silaji, want to go ahead?
Yes, I know when you were going through the shlokas, you mentioned that more than the physical pain is the emotional pain.
Yeah.
So if, for instance, if somebody's coping with, physical pain of their loved ones, some very close family member, the family member is going through a physical pain, but the emotional pain that, the person will feel because the person so dear is suffering with such a physical pain and you feel helpless.
True.
I mean, what is the best way to cope with that?
First is accepting, yes, the pain is there. Not going into a denial mode. Then saying, feeling the pain is fine, but it's if I think the more pain I feel, the better service I can do to the person who is in pain. That's a wrong assumption. Because the more pain I feel, it will paralyze me. It won't give me ideas to deal with situation in a better way. Don't you agree with this?
Yes, I agree with, but the situation is such that, what is causing the pain, person is suffering from 5 months and, this surgery and then this medication, but
Right.
it's just like feeling helpless that what is, a young person suffering with something,
Correct.
I mean, even any ideas like, one is not a doctor or anything
Right.
to suggest, but any type of like, herbal remedies are not, the young people not that open to those ideas.
Right.
But you feel the pain the person is suffering.
Correct.
Yeah, so I know it is to be strong to be able to help them by, being strong yourself, but deep within the pain is still there.
Yes, pain is there. I never said pain is not there, first thing. Nor did I say pain should not be there.
Mhm.
Did I ever say?
No.
No. That was not the point. Pain should be there or should not be there is not in my hands.
Yeah.
Totally. But one has to understand, but that is my contribution. My emotional makeup, for which I am helpless, gives me that emotional pain. Otherwise, it's a simple event. Somebody is in pain. Had it not been that person, not been your family member, somebody in distant, some 7 continents away, in some other country, some other language, some other culture, race, religion, or whatever, facing the same thing, and you would have read it, it would have given you some pain, okay? But for how long? 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour, 2 days. That's all. And it would have been over. But the connection makes the same event more painful. Correct? Because you are connected to this person in some ways, so it is giving you more pain. So it is not the event or the phenomena which is giving pain. Correct? It is the connection which lingers on the pain.
Yes.
Just realizing that. The very realizing this and then feeling the pain, you will find it reduces a bit.
But while you're in this world, the connections are there. You cannot deny the connection.
That's fine. That's fine.
You
Yeah, you cannot deny the connections. That is very true. So we cannot deny the pain. But let us not blame somebody else for the pain.
No, there's no blame. It's just feeling of
correct.
Feeling the emotional pain of what the person is suffering.
Now the next step is, if one chooses to, sometimes a person feels that being little away emotionally is being disloyal. So it's a very touchy topic, but I need to definitely touch this point. If you are comfortable with this pain and you feel enough loyalty towards the other person, and that you are able to feel the pain and you are able to cry well and do things, kindly continue so. But if you feel that, no, I can be loyal, I can be caring, being concerned, and yet I want to reduce my pain, then there is a way out. So that you have to choose. There is a way out. And the way is, start seeing similar cases with similar amount of pain. Look for such cases. Some other mother, sister, daughter suffering from that. Hear from them. Then you will find you are not alone. That reduces the pain. The biggest pain comes when we think that I am unique and I was chosen for this pain. That makes the pain more difficult to handle. But when you find that there are people with much more pain, then that reduces my pain. That is a intermediate step. Before we move to the next step, where we say that I decide not to feel the pain, or to a lesser degree, and continue to be more caring with more energy, because pain does sap my energy, doesn't it? So I need to have more energy so that I can contribute more towards the person in pain. And that's why I choose to reduce my pain by saying that this much is enough for today. The remaining pain I will go through tomorrow. These are really practical tips. They do work, but not before you have gone through that intermediate step of seeing more pain around. Otherwise, it won't work.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.
We can conclude.
Yeah. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.